Good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be here. I'll try and do without the microphone if you don't mind. And also, I know that I'm the only thing between you and your tea. So I've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to gallop through it.
It doesn't fit in the screen.
Yes, I've realised that. There's got to be a way around that. We'll go.
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, a double thanks. Thanks to Anna, Alex, director, for organising this wonderful conference. It's really an amazing achievement to bring everybody here in one piece. But also I have another thanks, because it's really thanks to the Institute here, colleagues in Sikkim, that I've been able to do this survey. It's been a collaborative endeavour, and I think particularly of Churinla, Tashila, Priscilla, Karuna, and in particular Ongtering Lepcha and Tashi Nordzum, who are not here today but travelled with me and by themselves far and wide across Sikkim to help gather the data. From September 2005, through the Namgyal Institute of Tibettology and in close partnership with the Department of Human Resource Development, formerly Education, I had the pleasure and privilege to supervise the first phase of a modern linguistic survey of Sikkim. To this end, the research team travelled to most of the government secondary schools in the state of Sikkim to administer a pretty extensive survey of 29 questions on language use to children in the schools. The results of this survey form the basis of this presentation. I should say what the survey was not was really a comprehensive linguistic survey of Sikkim in the manner that has been conducted by Genla George in Bhutan, and Nepal will soon have the first comprehensive linguistic survey of Nepal, LINSUN, it's been called, conducted by the Central Department of Linguistics, who are interested in language use, particularly in education and schools. Just a couple of words about what brought me to this, how I came to Sikkim. I first came to Sikkim through the Digital Himalaya project, which I established in Cambridge and then later took to Cornell in the States. We had the good fortune to digitize, through this rather amazing contraption, a lot of 16mm footage of Sikkim from the 1930s from the political officer Frederick Williamson. He was based in the residency where we were for dinner last night. And when I came to Sikkim with some of this footage, I had the chance to show it to people, to Anna and director and colleagues here at the Institute. And out of this interest and exploration of historical Sikkim, I became interested to work in modern Sikkim as well. So what is a linguistic survey? Well, every 10 years, the government of India, like the government of Nepal, conducts a detailed census. This decadal census of India is an increasingly robust and informed survey and a massive logistical undertaking. The findings of the 2001 census are being released in stages, and there will be another census in 2011. One of the domains which is discussed, and a few thoughts on multilingualism, because I think these are helpful for us as we move into the data that I'm going to furnish you with. Firstly, across India, of the over 2 million Nepali speakers, 40% speak 2 languages or more, and 20 speak 3 languages or more. This is all from the Government of India statistical profiles. I'm going to run through this a little bit. Bhutia speakers speak, well, 61% of them speak 2 or 3 languages, and 20% speak 3 or more. What I'd like to say really about this is the discrepancy. Well, I'll put it this way. The above data are showing us that you're more likely to be monolingual if you're Nepali than if you are Bhutia or Lepcha. This makes sense, it's not a surprise in certain ways. Conversely, Bhutia and Lepcha speakers are perhaps required to be more multilingual than mother tongue Nepali speakers, just in keeping with expectation. Minority languages and minority language speakers often have to learn regionally or nationally dominant languages. Okay, I'm going to just move away from this now. Look at the distribution of Nepali speakers across India. Firstly, it's of course not only concentrated in Sikkim and West Bengal, it moves across the northeast and a little bit in the northwest of India, even down into the border of Burma. The distribution of Bhutia speakers is quite intriguing because from the perspective of the Indian government, while the indigenous term of choice in Sikkim. It could be Bhutia or Denzong Ge as the language, or Loke, is that right, Anna?
Loke.
Loke, thank you. Across India, the Bhutia are classed as Bhotia, along with all other Bhotias. So it looks as if the Bhotia community of Sikkim is actually quite large, but it's not, because there are Bhotias in northwest India and all the way up into the borderlands. And there are Bhotias in other parts of the northeast as well. But Sikkim Bhutia are specified really in Sikkim. We have to note that, otherwise we'll get lost in numbers. Distribution of Lepcha speakers, as expected, very much in Sikkim and in certain parts of West Bengal, and the same for Limbu speakers. Schools in Sikkim. There's just shy of 2,000 schools in Sikkim, and of these, 3/4 are government schools. The remaining 1/4 are private institutions. It's important for us and important for the survey, because private schools, to my understanding, were not required to abide by the government curriculum, which includes a provision for vernacular language instruction. A breakdown of the schools. My focus was on the secondary and higher secondary schools in Sikkim. In terms of language curriculum, there's a few important things to point out. The medium of instruction is English, the mother tongue of virtually nobody. In a way, it's a great equalizer. You could argue that it means that everybody has equal access or equal lack of access to the medium of instruction. It's a quite contentious point in certain ways. I've put up here, just to show you, the wealth of language instruction in Sikkim schools. English is taught, the Roman alphabet is taught, a second language is introduced, then a third language option is introduced, and then by the time you get into senior school, you start having streams, both of which require English and a second language. Language instruction is a major component of education in the state. Language teaching. Well, a distinction is made between regional languages, which have been included in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. Nepali has been included, I should add, and state languages, which are non-scheduled by federal government, but may be recognized at a state level, such as Lepcha, Bhutia, Limbu, and others. We have among us colleagues and friends from the Department of Human Resources textbook office, and these people have been working for years now developing materials for the officially recognized state languages of Sikkim. The content is drawn in part from the culture of the community, and in part from sort of more national or even international discourses. But there are various parts of the textbooks that include information on oral history, diet, customs, clothes, myths. Language materials. Well, there's actually a rather good supply of things out there. This is a photo from Zongbu in North Sikkim, where teachers were using one of those old reproduction devices to produce a lecture exam. Here they are, fixing it when the ink ran out. I think it's a beautiful photo, actually. To me, it sums up a lot of learning about India through your own language. In other words, this is where the curriculum is not local. This is where the curriculum is national, is about teaching Indian history, but through the medium of, whether it be Lepcha or Dzongkha, or Bhutia or Limbu. So the story of Mother India through Sikkim. Language learning is an example of some of the kids in Zongbu, Namprik, learning from their Lepcha school books. The Lepcha numeral chart, and here on the right, the Limbu alphabet. Okay, 3 parts to the language survey in Sikkim. The first part is population. I've addressed that in brief now. The trends of population and language use, language enumeration over the last 100 years. The second part is language in education. I'm going to come on to that right now. The third part is language in administration. It's a very important point, but I really haven't focused too much on it yet. I think it makes sense to furnish the data first and then discuss really with local government and colleagues about language in administration. Perhaps like every good academic, I leave administration until the end. So, this is a beautiful map from Karang, 1969, the Kingdom of Sikkim. Of course, we have to remove the kingdom part now. But what I'd like to do is superimpose on this map population. For those of you who can see it, the bottom third of Sikkim is the most densely populated. Of course, around Gangtok and in all the southern reaches and into the west. Far west mountain ranges preclude habitation. But the important thing to see is that most of the north of Sikkim has virtually nobody, at least no statistically significant population. And if you superimpose on this map, a map of the district of Sikkim, you'll see there, the north, which takes up way over 2/3 of the land mass of Sikkim, is very, very sparsely populated. Therefore, my focus had to be in the east, south, and west. The north as well. We went to most schools in the north. From October 2005 until November 2006, the team visited 105 government and private schools in Sikkim and asked the higher classes, classes 8 to 12, to complete a survey of 29 questions on language use. 16,527 survey forms were completed by students, and we have about 500 completed by teachers. 52% of the respondents were female, 47 were male. For those of you who are good at mathematics, you'll see 1% are missing. What is their gender? They decline to offer it. Gangtok schools are particularly diverse, with many of Sikkim's ethno-linguistic groups represented here. And institutions range from government schools providing free education to expensive or quite expensive private schools. Here are some of the questions from the survey. How many languages can you speak? Which ones? How many languages can you write? Which ones? Which language or languages do you speak with your parents? And I should add, after doing this for a couple of months, I realized I should be asking, which language do you speak with your mother? And which language do you speak with your father? Because there is often a great difference. So one learns on the job. But thankfully, about 16,000 forms, I was able to have respondents answer mother, father, rather than just parents. Also an interesting question. Which languages do you speak with your grandparents? And which language do your grandparents speak together? And what language do your grandparents speak with your parents? So we tried to get a whole pattern, trying to understand processes of language shift over time. Which languages do you speak with your friends, your siblings? If you had to write a letter, a shopping list or something, which language would you write it in? Do you know any songs? If so, in which language? Do you know any poems? Which is your mother tongue? And which language is most important to you and why? These are about 20 of the 29 questions. Well, here's a sample of a completed survey form. So a 19-year-old woman, a Lepcha woman, in class 12, and if you can read it, for those few of you at the very front, but I'll decode it for those at the back, all the questions about which languages you can speak and write, which language your parents speak with each other, with you, with your grandparents, it's all Nepali. It's all Nepali. And it continues on the next page. Which languages do you speak with your friends? When it comes to one's own age group, then English suddenly comes in, alongside Nepali. When it comes to TV, and music and poetry, then Hindi comes in as well. And then question 21, which language do you consider to be your mother tongue? Lepcha. A language which this respondent herself does not speak. So this is a very interesting question. What is happening here? And I'd like to, not yet, but a little bit further in the survey, unpack it and puzzle out how, obviously people are not consciously, intentionally deluding us. It's not about that. It's about a different concept of what a mother tongue is. What is a mother tongue, and do you have to speak it? Okay. Here are the survey results. The green bar on the left, dark blue-grey bar in the middle are female, and then the light blue bar on the right are both. Let's march through them. This is the number of languages spoken. Over 60% of male and female respondents speak 3 languages, and about 20% speak 4 languages, and about around 10% speak 2 languages. Very few speak more than 4 languages, and very few people speak only 1 language. It's a very multilingual place, at least for young people, Sikkim. In terms of writing, it's pretty similar. If you just go back to the speaking and the writing, you'll see a very similar distribution here. About 70% of people, respondents in the schools, say that they write 3 languages. Far fewer write 4 or 2. Which languages are spoken? Well, over 90% of people at this age, in the schools we visited, speak Nepali. No surprise, I think. About 70% speak English, and just a little bit lower than that, in the sort of early 60s, speak Hindi. But what I wasn't prepared for was the huge drop, which we see Bhutia, Lepcha, Limbu, Tibetan, Bengali, Tamang also, but just off the chart. I mean, this is a massive drop. Which languages are written? Interestingly, English goes up, Unsurprisingly, Nepali goes down slightly. There are more people who speak Nepali than write it, more people who write English than speak it. Okay. Which language do you speak with your grandparents? Again, I was a little surprised by these findings once we started actually calibrating and disaggregating them, that over 75% of respondents spoke Nepali with their grandparents. Obviously, a tiny amount speak English, that's not particularly interesting. A few Hindi, a handful Bhutia, Lepcha, Limbu, etc. So what is this telling us about language shift? Well, it implies that Nepali has been a dominant language for at least a couple of generations. Right? Not just one generation, not just the parental, but most likely the grandparental one. Beyond that, we can't extrapolate based on this data. If I'd gone into the survey with any hypothesis, it would have been that this process of language shift happened more recently. What language do you speak with your parents? A very similar distribution to grandparents. Over 80% Nepali. What language do you speak with your mother? Well, a very similar distribution to the parental question. The interesting one is that when you go to father, the bar of English, if you look at it, the second bar jumps up. That's father. More respondents, both male and female, speak English with their fathers than with their mothers. What language do parents speak together? Again, of 80%, both male and female respondents. Nepali is remarkably high. What language do grandparents speak together? Well, Nepali has dropped down to 70, but it's still pretty high. And so 16,000 respondents have given that as their answer. Bhutia, Lepcha, Hindi, interestingly, Limbu have all come up a little bit, but have not made statistical inroads above 10-15%. What language do parents speak with grandparents? Also pretty similar. Nepali around 70%, Bhutia a little higher. And here's interesting, which is the language you speak with your siblings. Well, Nepali at 80% or above for all respondents, no matter ethnicity, age, gender. But English is also pretty high, but please note the gender disparity in the English. There are quite a lot more women who speak English with their siblings than men do. Okay. Now, what I found interesting here was that you speak more, students are speaking more English with their friends than they are at home. In other words, you speak Nepali with your siblings, but more English with your friends. Okay. It sort of makes sense. Friends in the school situation where English is the medium of instruction, English is being widely used in the classroom and in the playground as well. What language would you write a letter in? No surprises, I think, that English comes out at 85 or 90% for most respondents. Not a bad showing for Nepali at 30%, but it's pretty low for Hindi, and Bhutia, Lepcha, Limbu languages are basically statistically off this chart. Yeah? People do not regularly use these languages to write letters to each other. Same for the shopping list. I'm not really sure there's much of a difference there between a letter and a shopping list, but still, over 85-90% of people would write a shopping list in English. Okay. Songs. Well, what happens with songs? Hindi bounces back. Although, please note the gender difference, again, between men who are male respondents who about 70% know Hindi songs, but female respondents know 80% do. Here, you see much more sort of calibration. I mean, English is down. I think a fair amount of English songs are learnt in school, but Nepali and Hindi songs are popular and known, and then under 5% Bhutia, Lepcha, Limbu songs. Poems, interestingly, I think partly because it's taught in school, English bounces way up again, Hindi and Nepali come down, but a pretty good showing on both. TV, again, I think this is interesting. Interesting because of the gender disparity. Far more male respondents watch English TV, and far more female respondents watch Hindi TV. I'm not going to say anything about that. I should say I watch Hindi TV. Now, here's what's interesting. This is kind of where it all comes together, the mother tongue issue. Well, a few points worth drawing attention to. I think that the mother tongue question can be divided into two categories. There are the categories where languages have more speakers than respondents claim to have as their mother tongue. Would make sense. More people speak a language than speak it as a mother tongue. And then there are other languages which have more people claiming them as mother tongues than can actually speak them. It's an unusual kind of finding. There's a division, and Bhutia, Lepcha, and Limbu come strongly, firmly in the second category. Nepali is spoken to some extent by almost everybody, but only 65 to 70% of people claim it as a mother tongue. Let's look when we superimpose the people who speak a language onto this mother tongue picture. Well, you've got, please note, these three, that's what we're looking at. We go now to which languages are spoken, Bhutia, Lepcha, Limbu. Those three. Less people speak Bhutia, Lepcha, and Limbu than claim them as mother tongues. What's going on? What's going on? Well, this is not the case of people subverting an objective survey for political gain. There are emotional attachments of language. There are also many different things that people are doing when they answer this question. From the observation that I made during the survey, students answered this question in a variety of different ways. Some wrote down what language they spoke at home. Some wrote down the name of the language they thought they should speak at home. Some read the question as another way of asking for their ethnicity. Some read the question as a question on heritage, on belonging, on origin. And some just turned to their teacher and said, "Sir, what do I write here?" So this is a very open question, which is answered in whatever way you want to answer it. But remember, I think something about this point of mother tongue, speaking a language, or perhaps more saliently, not speaking a language, is not a diagnostic marker of ethnic identity in Sikkim. You can be of a community and not speak a language, and you can claim a language as a mother tongue, as a heritage sense of belonging or ancestry, and not have competence in it. So the idea of competence is blown apart here a little bit, because if we think of as language mother tongue being related to linguistic competence, then we're seeing a disjunction. One student said to me, when I asked him about the kind of writing a mother tongue of a language he didn't speak, he said, "Of course we have a mother tongue, I just don't speak it." We're going to move past now. The most important language. Well, this was interesting. I also expected to find a little bounce back for Bhutia, Lepcha, and Limbu. And outside of Dzongu, where there was a clear sense that Lepcha was an important language and many respondents put down that as their choice, English came up again way above anything else, around 75 to almost 80%, as the most important language. A language, of course, of access, education, opportunity, jobs. Just have a quick look at some of the official language policies of Sikkim. Nepali, Bhutia, and Lepcha from 1977 were adopted as languages that could be used for official purposes and communication in Sikkim. Over the next 20 years, many more languages were added to this list by the Sikkim government. Limbu, Tamang, Ulum, Magad, Newari, Sunwar, Rai, Sherpa. All of these languages can and are spoken in the Sikkim Assembly, and interpreters are provided. The state government has asked for all of these languages to be included in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution. I would say that's pretty unlikely. And the Sikkim government degree colleges in Tadong and Namchi teach Lepcha and Bhutia up to degree level. We also have the Sikkim Herald, published in 11 languages and 11 scripts. One could say that this is an amazing achievement. In a way, of course, it is. What it's doing is symbolically powerful. But in terms of actual utility, competence, and language use, I think there's a much longer discussion to be had about that. How many people use it? I would love to do a survey. How many people read the Rai version of the Sikkim Herald? I'm not sure yet. Symbolic diversity is an important part of the language policy of Sikkim. And to say symbolic rather erodes its potential sort of a powerful meaning. Symbolism is good. We know how powerful symbolism is. The fact that street signs or headquarter district signs are in 2 or 3 or 4 languages, it matters. It's not only symbolic, it's also very emotive for people. This is the Department of Information Technology. This is the community, the CIC Information Center in Dzongu in North Sikkim. It's where you get broadband, satellite wireless, and the sign is in English and in Lepcha. So a few conclusions then. Nepali is the lingua franca for most people in Sikkim, no matter what their ethnicity, no matter what their gender, and it appears to have had this position for at least 2 generations. despite some very creative and forward-thinking state government plans supporting local mother tongues, the spread and dominance of Nepali shows no sign of slowing down. The mother tongues of the communities whose ancestors came from Nepal are particularly under threat because most of these descendants now no longer speak Magar Tamang Newar, but speak only Nepali and then English and maybe Hindi as well. Some Bhutia students, I asked, returned English as their mother tongue, particularly in urban centres, Gangtok. A number of students have offered a language as their mother tongue, which they themselves do not speak. We've addressed that point. In the Lepcha reservation of Dzongu, where Lepcha is still spoken by all generations, Lepcha was often returned as both the mother tongue and the most important language. Outside of Dzongu, though, 95% of all students chose English as their most important language. And the teaching of local languages as subjects in school is very encouraging, and it helps to give this symbolic value to the mother tongue, even if that symbolic value does not necessarily translate into spoken proficiency. Okay. So the next steps. Well, the first thing to do would be to chart the distribution of these results onto specific districts, regions, and schools for greater precision. What I can present here are these large charts, but there's a very interesting picture emerging which is more regional, local, about private versus government schools, about region as well. Overlay these findings onto a detailed map of Sikkim, disaggregate the data for gender, age, and ethnicity, and we can extrapolate to an extent ethnicity back from last name, although that's also a slightly more complicated issue. Anonymize the data set, return it to the government of Sikkim, to Human Resources, provide a copy to the Institute here. And we must always remember that this analysis has got to be separated from the preservation and the presentation of data. In other words, the aim of this linguistic survey, small that it is to provide the evidence, not the verdicts. Thought for the day. Hari Bari spoils the party.